Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and today we're going to be looking at the Renters Reform Bill that's due to come in shortly. And no better person to help us with that in-depth examination other than William Reeve, CEO of Goodlord. Now, Goodlord are rental industry's leading tech platform, providing references, insurance and compliance technology. In addition, Goodlord supply information, training and education for the industry's media. William, welcome.
Thank you, Stephen.
Lovely to have you here, and I hope you can help us wade our way through this new legislation. William, the first thing I want to say to you is we've got this new rental bill coming in. Can you summarise for me the key issues that they're trying to address? And we'll come to the word trying later on, but just the key issues.
Well, I mean, this bill is the end of a lot of work ever since actually Theresa May's manifesto. And it was in the successive Tory manifestos, and now, of course, it's under a Labour government. But it's been renamed a little bit, but it's still fundamentally very similar. And what both parties have been promising is that they're going to abolish no-fault evictions, or Section 21 evictions, as the industry would call it.
Right.
And that's the sort of one of the big changes. It's designed to give tenants a bit more security, a bit more confidence, a bit more of a sense that if they get into some argument with the landlord, the next thing they're going to find isn't that they're having notice served on them. So that's one of the big changes. But to do that, they're doing something which wasn't in the manifesto, which is they're abolishing periodic tenancies. They're abolishing the idea that, they're abolishing fixed-term tenancies and making tenancies go periodic. And in other words, you're not allowed to have a 12-month tenancy. It has to be something where there's a rolling notice period. And that's quite a big change to the sector, especially, for example, for the student market, where it's completely normal to have agreements for 10 or 12 months. And then a bunch of other changes coming in too. So things like you won't be able to agree things in advance. They're banning taking more than a month's rent in advance. So a variety of sort of, if you like, more detailed changes. But the fundamentals are this point around abolishing no-fault evictions and moving tenancies periodic.
Going back many years, I remember when these assured shortholds first came in, agents were actually encouraged to get the Section 21 notice signed at the point of signing the lease. Well,
oh, really? Well, I mean,
that was the practice.
That may have been the practice then,
so,
I think.
And you see, that would now be totally taboo. But I really can't understand. You know, life's moved on, technology's moved on, information has moved on. I can't understand why we can't have a new set of leases to match today's market. In other words, fine, why can't you specify that I want to be a long-term landlord, so therefore I'm allowed to issue 2, 3, 4, 5, 10-year leases? Or alternatively, because of my financial situation and not being able to guarantee that I'll be here to let my property in 12 months' time or 2 years' time, I'm a short-term landlord. I don't know why we can't categorised like that.
This bill isn't changing the very short-term lets, so the kind of holiday lets, the 1 week at a time and stuff. It isn't affecting those. You still be able to do those, and you'll still be able to use what are known as licenses, for example, which is where your tenant doesn't have quite as much control. You know, the landlord's still got access to the property. That's the basis that people at hotels use. That's not changing, but I'm afraid, as soon as you're asking for sympathy as a landlord, and why can't I, as a landlord, do it? Like the government's essentially saying that it's not for you, the landlord, it's for the tenants. That's their response.
Yeah. But I mean, we've had all sorts of restrictions put on tenancies across the UK. I mean, we've had rental caps, haven't we? I think in Scotland.
In Scotland, yeah.
Didn't seem to work.
Well, it clearly didn't work. Left a bunch of students homeless, actually, in Glasgow. So it doesn't work anywhere. It's been tried, really. If you look at Berlin or you look at New York, it's always ends in tears, rental caps. And to be fair, the current government has absolutely set its face against doing rental caps, even though their mayor, Sadiq Khan, has been asking for the ability to offer them. The government said, no, that's one step too far.
Well, I think various things have happened to the rental market. We've had some rather penal sort of tax changes, haven't we, that have encouraged landlords to leave the market, especially the smaller ones, because I'm afraid the days of thinking, sort of that landlords are the wicked entity. They're not. They're not really, and they're not.
Plenty of people who still think they are. Stephen,
Yeah,
I'm afraid.
well, yeah, but the profits in buy-to-let these days are very, very slim in terms of margin, aren't they?
It's absolutely right. I mean, it's through a mixture of reasons. Ever since George Osborne started to clamp down on what he saw as kind of an unfair advantage that buy-to-let landlords had, and he started to restrict their tax reliefs. He started to restrict how much they could claim on maintenance and dilapidations. He's put up stamp duty for people buying second homes. Ever since that, then there's been a double whammy of property prices not increasing. So, whether you're looking at the income landlords are receiving, or whether you're looking at the gains they were hoping to make as property sort of prices tended to go up over time, they've been hammered, and there have been a lot of landlords who've been really asking themselves, "What's in it for me?"
Yeah, I'm a little surprised because although I understand fully that a buy-to-let property can't be categorised as a pension, there's no reason why it can't be your pension.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it would be seen as something they're going to rely on when they need it.
And it would be, and that was attractive because you got the rental income, which allowed you to hold the property, maintain it, and keep it running. And you had the additional benefit of perhaps a capital gain.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that has saved the government over the years lots and lots of money on having to support pensioners who otherwise might have been on the breadline, as it were. So I'm a little bit puzzled about the government's attitude over that, or certainly the last government's attitude. I don't know about this one yet. We'll have to.
Yeah, well, certainly the mood music is like we're not really interested in landlords. I think landlords are one notch away from estate agents on the country's popularity contest, and that is right at the bottom of the ladder, unfortunately, next to politicians. I think the surveys tell us, and maybe second-hand car dealers. But there's no sympathy for landlords, whereas tenants are seen as somehow deserving protection and voting.
Now, William, are any of these new rules, new laws going to be retrospective in any way? Or will it simply apply to brand new tenancies?
That's a very good question, Stephen. And of course, tenancies take a while to set up, and the Act is going to take effect on a particular date. But a lot of people are asking, kind of, what happens there? What about tenancies that are already up and running? What about tenancies that we've verbally agreed but haven't yet signed? And the answer is that no, the Act's not going to do anything retrospectively, but it is going to be retroactive. So what it's going to do is it's going to convert all assured short-hold tenancies into assured tenancies. And even if the tenancy on paper says that it's going to expire in 2 years' time or whatever, it's not. It's going to move to being a periodic tenancy on a rolling notice period.
Do you think that's going to cause a problem for a lot of landlords?
Well, I think
particularly those that need to stay fluid because of their funding.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of some landlords, I mean, the ones who don't have agents, I think are going to be potentially in for a rude shock because a lot of landlords are in this because they think it's a low touch thing. They don't have to spend too much time. There are over 1 million accidental landlords in this country who are the guys who sort of probably used to own the house themselves, managed to buy the second house, get the next rung on the ladder, and rather than selling the first place, keep it as an investment. And a lot of those people are not spending too much time thinking about this. They're not reading the Act, they're not scrutinising it. And if they've got a reputable agent, then they'll be helped on it, and they won't find themselves falling non-compliant and getting fined. But I think there will be landlords who aren't really paying attention, and the next thing you know, they've served notice on the tenant, and the next thing you know, the tenant's taking them to tribunal, and there's going to be hefty fines landing on them. So I think it's going to take a while for this to sort of shake through, really.
It's going to be even more important for landlords to understand really that it's a business. We get a lot of questions in here at the studio about becoming a landlord. What should I do? What I shouldn't do? And sometimes I think if you're having to ask these questions, I really wouldn't do it.
Well, we would say go and talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. Get a professional to help you. And there are a lot of agents who are very good at this and are really onto it. And we try and make sure we're helping the helper, if you like. So we're kind of supporting agents to stay abreast of the regulations, have tools and so on to be able to manage these things and do it in a way where they can't fall off the tracks. They'll always be compliant. So if you're using agents who are taking this seriously, being professional, actually it doesn't need to be that difficult. But the agents are going to be a bit swan-like here. They're going to be paddling furiously to sort of keep everything legit, because the rules are going to be a big change.
Well, again, agents is always a difficult subject, and the competence of agents is always under question, isn't it? I mean, do you know, I've had occasion, even these last few years, dealing with these big tower blocks here, for instance, in Canary Wharf. I've still seen leases that have been cut and pasted, and on a 60th floor flat, they're still saying, and you shall clean your chimney 3 times a month and keep the lawn mowed outside.
Well, no, people say, oh, I'll do it on ChatGPT or whatever, but of course it turns out the next thing you know, the thing's got various compulsory fees for the tenants. Those have been illegal for 5 years, and that's the sort of hazard that you've really got to watch out for.
Yes, I do. And I think here's where your guidance comes in. And a lot of times I read very carefully your guidance in the media, and I think it's very good. And I think a lot of agents must be really in your debt, actually, for publishing that stuff. Because having read, I mean, I've read this new bill, and I've got to say I've been in property for, well, it seems like 100 years, but I don't get it. I can't fathom it all. It's in such complicated language, as with the Leasehold and Freehold Act. That's in such complicated.
Well, that one's I think even more. Yeah, but one of the things the Rental Rights Bill is doing is it's amending the Tenant Fee Act, and so actually you've got to be, you've got multiple places to look, and the original document is now changing and so on. So it is quite complicated, and we've been trying. One of my organisation's objectives is to make renting better, make the experience better, make it the best it can be. And as part, we see one of the things we can do here is try and offer support. And we run blogs and we run webinars and we do training and education. And I think all of that it's not a commercial endeavour really for us. It's just trying to help the industry and push forward the knowledge and understanding.
Okay. Well, look, a good rental market requires tenants, and it requires landlords. But what we have seen is an exodus from the market, from particularly the smaller buy-to-let landlord. Is that softening at all, or are they still leaving in droves?
Well, look, I mean, we do regular surveys of the industry, and we certainly see there are a lot of landlords thinking about selling up. But of course, the reality is that everybody who sells has got to sell to somebody, and the market for first-time buyers hasn't got much easier either. Of course, with interest rates going up, mortgage availability has been harder actually than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So there are a lot of landlords kind of really questioning the numbers, asking what's in it for them, realizing that actually when you think about what's happened with taxes, when you think about what's happening with prices, and when you look at the new rules and the hassle, and maybe having to pay quite a lot of money to keep the property environmentally acceptable for renting, because those standards are all tightening too. They've got to sell to somebody, but generally there's often another landlord on the other side of the transaction. So it looks like what's happening is a lot of the kind of accidental, I don't like calling them amateur, but smaller landlords are selling to the more established, more professional landlords, the ones with who's it's worth their while staying on top of this, and I think they're seeing it with a slightly more long-term game. So the rental sector is still growing. But there are a lot of people in there who would probably sell if they could, and are feeling like if prices pick up a bit, then they're probably going to go and sort of take the money and put it somewhere else. So I think that's creating poor morale. It means among other things that it's pushing rents up, because landlords are sitting there going, I'm not making what I used to. I can't claim the same tax reliefs, and I'm not getting the return from when I sell the property. I need to make some return from having all this money locked up in something which is actually creating quite a lot of hassle for me. So rents have been going up, and so nobody's happy really. And you'll get in parts of London, you see 40 tenants competing for one property, and so there's a lot of stress in the system. And the bill is not levelling the supply and demand imbalance at all. Really, it's still going to be a bit of a bun fight to actually find and secure a property.
Now we were talking off camera about the market as it is, and you can see quite easily that one part of the property market can easily affect another, and I'm particularly interested here about how all this rental business is affecting property developers. Now, what we've got here in Canary Wharf, for example, we have a lot of 40, 50, 60, 70-story buildings.
course, yeah.
And what we're finding now is the insurance companies are taking and buying from the developer perhaps half the block.
Yep. Yeah.
And saying, right, well, we're buying this.
Long-term income.
Very, very good, and all the rest of it. But if rents become prohibitive, they're not going to be able to rent these properties in the volume that they think they are. And secondly, there don't seem to be any particular government incentives for saying to those investors, the big investors, look, if you keep it for 10 years, if you sell it, perhaps you could have it free of any capital gain, provided you perhaps you reinvest that capital repayment into more property to let, and that way we'd build up a whole portfolio of properties. But there doesn't seem to be anything there.
No government incentives appearing here. I mean, there might be a few around the environmental upgrades. That still hasn't been confirmed yet. But no, I mean, in terms of kind of incentives to invest in property, I'm afraid no, it's gone the other way. Starting with the George Osborne budget of just over 10 years ago.
Yes. But you see, that is going to affect. It's like saying, we want to. I mean, I did a programme the other day, and I said, 1.5 million homes in this parliament. Well, good luck with that. I think they're dreaming, to be honest. I really do, because not only have you got to build them, you've got to sell them. And you've also got to finance them.
Yep.
And finance for property development is not that easy these days. Unless you can show what it is going in and you've got an exit strategy almost guaranteed, you're going to struggle to borrow the money. I mean, these big blocks of, say, 60, 70 stories, you're talking, even at basic cost, probably £500 million to build. So your income's got to be fairly sure. You've got to be sure of your market. You've got to have some stability in the market. And I just feel we're lacking that.
Yeah, I think, Stephen. Look, we're here in Canary Wharf at the moment, which is where it's got these kind of large purpose-built blocks, but actually they're a really small part of the market. They're under 2% of the market still. These kind of multi-family offices, as Americans would call them, tower blocks, as you and I tend to call them, and most of the market is more conventional housing. I think stability is a really important word, actually, and of course, what the government would argue, I think, don't like putting words in their mouth, but they're arguing that by removing fixed-term tenancies, making tenancies periodic, making it harder for landlords to evict tenants, they're giving tenants more stability. And if that's right, then probably from an investment point of view, what's not to like? And there's still going to be a big excessive demand over supply. So none of us are expecting to see property sitting empty. So I think in terms of the kind of financing side of it, the secure income streams should exist. I mean, you raise a good point around affordability and whether the rents just get so high that actually this thing starts snapping.
But I suppose, contrary to that, the good thing is that perhaps if you've got big institutions buying half a block to rent or whatever, if they find they're out of sync with the market in terms of price, they've probably got the longevity to be able to say, well, okay, we'll take a hit for the next couple of years and then build it back up again 3-4 years down the line. I suppose that can be a...
Yeah, and some of them more, again, certainly in parts of London, they're trying to invest in a more premium offering. And the government says, that sounds great, we like decent homes, and we're creating a decent home standard, in fact, for it. But actually, when the institutions are meaning is like, no, we're going to do gyms, we're going to have swimming pools, and the market for that may be quite limited, actually. As you say.
Don't start me on that one. I live in a block where my service charge is over 20,000 a year.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Mainly due to swimming pools, gymnasiums, and 24/7.
But the reality is that isn't the bulk of the market, and at the end of the day, there's a fairly obvious way of filling those rooms if you have to, which is you don't include gym access or whatever it is. So I think the tower block dynamic is not really the front and centre for this bill.
Okay, good. Well, the other thing that I just want to just bring up again, you mentioned this word stability, and I agree that renters need stability, they need surety of where they're going to be able to live. I mean, one of the advantages of renting, I mean, it's not all downside. I mean, you can move. I don't like the view, I'm moving. I don't like the space, I'm
much
moving.
more flexible, yeah.
Very flexible.
It makes it much easier to get into the job market and things like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. However, there's another aspect to this. If you're a bank and you're financing buy-to-let, we've had a period where banks will, not look at the individual, but look at the property and the rental income to decide whether they'll fund it or not. Now, I guess if I was a banker looking at it and I think, well, okay, that's fine on that side of it, let me look at the downside of life. What happens if this landlord can't rent his property, or there's a big void that he's not taken into account? Well, I suppose I might start to say, if you're going to let the tenant have almost a forever lease, how do I get out of this if my borrower messes up? Am I going to be trying to sell and repossess a property that's got a sitting tenant, in which case the value is going to go right down? What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, look, I mean,
problem?
I think, and I mean, if you want to look at it from the point of view of the banks, I mean, the key question when you're thinking from a financer's point of view is risk and then risk mitigation. And a big part of that is what happens if something goes wrong. And, a few years ago, you would have a relatively easy and fast and clean process for getting a tenant out who wasn't paying. And the courts would have been fairly quick and efficient, and it would have not taken you too long. And then you'd have immediately relet the property. So your kind of void period and so on was not too much of a problem. These days, the courts are overwhelmed. It takes much longer to evict tenants, and with the new bill, the notice periods are getting longer. Now, if the tenant doesn't pay, that is going to be still grounds for evicting the tenant. But a lot of people are really looking for ways to protect their rent, and there is now a booming market, which my organisation is part of. In fact, we're for helping landlords protect rent and be covered financially, and so that helps them pay the finance costs on the mortgage and so on. But the court process is something that it was raised actually under the previous government when the Act was getting debated in Parliament, that the courts couldn't cope. And in fact, Michael Gove delayed proceeding with the Act, saying that not proceeding with the Act. He put a stipulation into the Act that certain things wouldn't take effect until the court system had improved.
Yeah.
That's now gone. So
well, don't hold your breath.
And so A, the courts are not improving, and B, you can't hold even your breath because this thing is going to take effect as soon as the commencement date. So no, it is a worry.
But again, although probably somebody would argue, well, you've got tier 1 and tier 2 tribunals, I'm not that enamoured with the county court's ability to be able to handle a lot of property matters. It's quite complicated these days, and you're forever hearing how district judges or county courts are making a bit of a mess of something or being far too lenient with one party or another. Yeah.
Well, and it's going to get worse, Stephen, because actually one of the provisions in the bill is that it's what we call a complainant's charter. Really, it's a saying essentially on reviewing rents, if the tenants want to challenge the rent, they can take it to a tribunal. The tribunal takes months, and even if the tribunal awards against the tenant, there's no retrospectiveness to it. So in fact, the tenants just save themselves many months worth of increased rent. So they've only got an incentive to complain and to challenge the rent. There's no reason not to, really, because they're just buying themselves time on the previous rent. So I think the government kind of thinks that's alarmist when that's been pointed out. And we really expect there to be a huge rise in volumes in the courts.
I think if anybody who's witnessed the court's handling of property matters will know that the tenant quite often will be the expert and will be the absolute expert at spreading things out, making things very difficult for a landlord to get judgment or whatever else. And of course the judges, in fairness, are thinking, well, this is somebody's home, it's somebody's...
Yeah, it's a roof over people's head and so on. You can't take that seriously.
It's very difficult. But I do think we're in the realms now of needing specialist property courts. Yeah, I think that's almost.
Well, that's what Scotland's done, and in some ways, actually, and Scotland in many ways has been showing the way here, and so many aspects of the new bill are kind of bringing aspects of the Scottish system into England, but it's they haven't really focused on this need for specialist courts yet.
No. Do you think they should?
Yeah, I certainly think anything that could streamline the court system. We think they should. We think first of all. The court judgment should apply to the date that the rent was due to change, not from the day of the court judgment. Or there's just no incentive for the court ever to reach a judgment. Secondly, we think there should be some administrative charge, which if your claim was spurious, basically you don't get back. Fine, if your claim's successful, fine, then that's a different situation. But there should be something to just put a little bit of a kind of cost in way, make people think twice before taking a claim.
One of the difficulties with going to court over unpaid rent is that the moment you say to a tenant, we're going to go to court, they say, oh, lovely. They know there's 6 or 8 months waiting time, and they don't pay the rent in that 6 or 8 months. They just think, oh well, it's a holiday, and I'll take whatever the court says at the end.
No, and and if that's your worry, then you are going to need some rent protection, and you should be looking out for your ways to get rent protection, because rent protection is your only real safeguard in that situation.
Yeah. Now, just out of interest on that subject of landlords protecting their rents, either through insurance or bonds, whatever, are there any stipulations in this new act that say that you mustn't discriminate on the basis of?
Yeah, so there's certainly stipulations about not discriminating. I think the scenarios that people are particularly worried about are people on benefits and people having children. And there are also additional rights around tenants' rights to have pets, which is often a bugbear. Although the Act isn't allowing all tenants to have pets. It's and if you're in a building, for example, where the landlord themselves has got a covenant that this is a pet-free building, then it remains a pet-free building. It stays a pet-free building. Yeah, but the discrimination point is real, and of course under discrimination legislation there are 7 protected characteristics, and I think anybody who's not careful might find themselves falling foul of that legislation if they're not showing that their process is fair.
I mean, I've never really, well, I kind of do and I don't, but you get a lot of landlords who will say, I don't want tenants who are being paid by the government on benefits.
Yeah, but I'm afraid you can't discriminate against that.
You're not going to be able to do that, are you?
You can discriminate, if you want to call it that, against people who just can't afford that property. So you're absolutely allowed to make sure that they've got kind of the income needed to pay the rent. But benefits are a source of income, and they're as valid a source of income as any other source of income. So, and you're not allowed to say, well, I prefer actually you had it as a salary rather than benefits. That's illegal. Or that will become illegal.
Yeah, well, that's probably a good thing on balance.
I mean, you can understand the logic for it, absolutely. And of course, people. I mean, we know the referencing side of things quite well, and the number of different ways people can have the money they need is enormous. I think there's that whole thing about how many different configurations BMW can make cars in, and I'm sure there are more configurations of income and money and how tenants pay for things than there are cars. Yes. So it is complex.
And I mean, if you do start to discriminate on that basis, you've got to be very careful. I mean, there are a myriad of circumstances of why people fall on hard times.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so what do? Deny them a home?
And that's another reason to think about how you protect your rent. But at the end of the day, there are two things you're trying to think about. One is what's the situation when the tenant moves in, and the other one is what's the risk the tenant might have a change of circumstances and find themselves on hard times. And both of those, if you're really worried about it, get protection.
In some respects, government-based income, through benefits is rock solid income, isn't it, to a degree? Because I think there used to be a lot of question about whether that benefit was paid to the tenant and then to the landlord, or paid directly to the landlord. If it's paid directly to the landlord, I can't see the problem.
It generally isn't, though. In fairness, it's often paid to the tenant, and then the tenant has to, exactly what happens with it is up to the tenant.
Subject to.
Yes, no, that isn't changing as part of the Act.
Whatever. Well, William Reeve, CEO of Goodlord, thank you very much for coming in today. It's been absolutely amazing to have you here and hear your take on the new legislation. And perhaps you'll come back a little later in the year and we'll discuss how it's working or not.
Stephen, it'd be lovely to see you again.
Okay. Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. This has been Property Matters. Join me again next time.